Hope everyone's day is off to a good start so far. Got a pretty cool presentation and show scheduled for today. I think we've got a nice little short squeeze to watch play out. It's been one I've been talking about with Traderade members and starting to see signs that it's coming into shape this morning. So we'll be talking about that and some more. Stay tuned. Go on, start the show in just about 2 minutes here. And to all out there, happy Taco Tuesday. We actually had a preemptive taco last night. You may have heard that first, the July 9th deadline was extended until August 1st for trade talks. And there were some new tariffs that were introduced, kind of going back to the April levels with Japan, South Korea, a bunch of other countries, some of which I was surprised they even really bothered to mention because it's somewhat inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. But what's real interesting about all of this is they already said we may not actually do these tariffs if we can come to some kind of agreement. Then none of this is really final. So we're already at the point where there's a preemptive taco in play just in time for Taco Tuesdays. All right. Well, it is 9 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. And that means it's time for this week's episode of Back to the Futures with me, Markets and Mayhem, brought to you in partnership with Bookmap. And this is going to be a fun episode, I think, because we're going to look at things a little differently. I usually focus a little more on the futures. Today, we're going to focus on some stocks, and in particular, one stock that's already starting a squeeze. It could be a pretty powerful move. But before we get to that, just a little bit about me. My journey started 20 years ago in trading in 2005. And I have to say that trading has been an incredible journey of self discovery. You learn more about yourself trading than just about anything because really you're pushing yourself to so many different types of limits. You're seeing the extent of your ability to deal with greed, with fear, with making very important decisions in short periods of time repeatedly, which at first can become somewhat mentally exhausting, but you build up stamina. You also start to learn you don't always need to have skin in the game, that trading is more like sniping. You're looking for that opportunity that fits your setup, and you're playing that and just that, and really trying to avoid getting sucked into just watching the market and playing the market because you want to. And I think that's an important part of the whole idea of becoming more consistent is discipline. Having the discipline to know when it's not time to trade and when it's absolutely time to go out and look for those opportunities that fit those setups and engage the market. So I wanted to share that with folks because I see a lot of folks out there that unfortunately sort of just compulsively trade. Now, if that works for you, that's awesome. No worries. But if you find yourself over trading and just kind of being in the market for the idea of getting that next dopamine cycling adrenaline rush, my advice is to take a step back and ask yourself, why are you really playing this game? Are you playing it to make money, or are you playing it for the buzz? Because if you're playing it for the buzz, you probably won't last long. And if you're playing it to make money, you got to reevaluate your approach. I just wanted to share that because I know a lot of folks, especially that are newer to this game, get caught in over trading. And it's fine if you want to pay your broker's kids through college. If that's the goal, that's very benevolent and awesome. But if you're really trying to build wealth over time, then it's about consistency. And it's about building that consistency through discipline and adhering to a system. And that's why I've leaned into taking a more systematic approach to the way that I try to trade. Rather than leaning into just discretionary or gut feel trading, I really like to have the data drive how I trade. That's just a little bit about me. And I co-founded Traderade in 2022. We're just about 3.5 years old now. It's been an amazing journey. We've got so many cool things in the works. I'm actually super excited about some of the new software and trading tools I'm developing. So if you want to learn more about us, visit our website at Traderade.com. Welcome you all to check it out. Now let's dive into some charts here. First, the New York Stock Exchange, the number of stocks above their 20-day moving average had become quite overbought recently. We saw yesterday the market came down. Some of that had to do with renewed trade tensions, but realistically speaking, it was just looking for an excuse to de-risk a little bit after becoming a little frothy. We are coming into today just a bit overbought as well. So I would just add that as just a little bit of caution. Now, overbought conditions can resolve in a lot of ways. It doesn't mean the market just has to go down. You can resolve an overbought condition with consolidation as well. But it does mean, if your hope is that we're going to make a new all-time high today, the probabilities behind that, based on what we're seeing here, are a bit lower. That's all. Now, let's look at some of the SPX options visualizer levels. We've got interest rolling up to the 6,500 strike on the S&P 500 cash index. That's the new call wall. We also have a lot of interest building at 6,300, which is just under where we're trading pre-market here. So we can see that larger desks are still betting on higher prices in this market. We are in positive gamma territory as well. That's constructive. That means that you're more likely to have dips bought, rips sold, vol compression. And we are in July. July seasonally is a very good month for markets. Over the last 10 years, it's had, I think, about a 90% probability of gains in the S&P 500. So that's also just a bit of summer seasonality. It tends to be June, July are very good months. August is a little more shaky. And typically September, October are not the best months. A lot of bottoms are formed in October. So right now it's low liquidity, summertime trading. There's a lot of hedge funds that are caught super short right now. And I think that's something. And there's a lot of hedge funds caught super short right now, and I think that's something to pay attention to as well. So we have a stock on short squeeze watch right now. It's SoundHound, SOUN. It's got a float of 359 million, short interest of a whopping 34% of float. It's a high beta stock. I usually like to look for higher beta stocks for these short squeezes. This is 2.71 beta. 2.79 beta, so it's trading at almost 3 times the beta of the S&P. That's how that is calculated. And that gives you a sense as just how much it can potentially move. And the relative volume right now is about 1.31, so it's moving higher. The volume has been increasing. Yesterday's volume was over 40 million shares. The average volume is 31 million shares, and just this morning, in the pre-market session, it's already trading up 7.46% on 3.42 million shares traded. And I was actually working on this slide deck about an hour ago when this squeeze was starting to build pre-market. So when I was working on it, it was trading up just over 4%. Those gains have nearly doubled, but I don't think we're done yet. This may be a swing squeeze play. So let's look at some of the data here in the charts. And by the way, the average volume of this with the amount of the float that's short, it could give us about 20 days to cover unless the volume keeps ratcheting up. So looking at SoundHound here on a weekly chart, you can see we have signs of a potential bottom here. It looks like we put in a higher low. We're breaking above the 21-week moving average, and we're starting to pull free from this chunky bit of the volume profile, which had us consolidating there for really months, about 4 months of consolidation in that area. So I think that now this stock, along with a number of the other really crowded shorts, could have some room to move. And I'm watching the action this morning. This has been one I shared with Traderade members, I want to say earlier in June, saying keep this one on watch because I think it's getting ready to make a big move. And we've had some others that have been really good plays as well. Short squeezes have been kind of the name of the game over the last several months. And it has everything to do with the way hedge funds hedge, or really don't actually hedge. What I mean is when you're a long short fund, you're finding stocks you assume are winners, usually based on a combination of fundamentals and momentum. A lot of the hedge funds crowd into the big tech stocks, and that's their long book. Their short book is usually based on finding stocks they feel have deteriorating fundamentals, and they get crowded into these trades. It's like they're using the same methodology to find their shorts. So the reason that SoundHound has such a high amount of short interest, and some of these others as well, is because almost all the same players are crowding into these to offset their longs. And the idea of being hedged is, okay, if the market goes up, my longs go up and my shorts are not supposed to go up quite as much. If the market goes down, my shorts fall in a greater amount than my longs. So, the idea of a hedge fund is that basically you're offsetting your risk in either scenario. But the reality of a hedge fund is when you have two completely different factors, such as small cap, high beta growth, and large cap or mega cap, mid beta growth, those two don't move the same way. And often is the case when one side of the trade gets super crowded, you get a big squeeze. So with SoundHound, that's what I'm looking for. And these are the types of trades I love finding because they tend to move pretty quickly. They tend to be pretty rewarding, and they got that high beta adrenaline feel. And it matches actually my systematic approach, because when I back test these types of squeeze, this has all the sort of variables that we want to see. So let's zoom in to the daily chart. And the daily chart shows clearly that we are now in a pretty well-defined uptrend. We're breaking above the daily Ichimoku cloud. The MACD histogram is turning positive, and we've pushed above this low volume node that I would consider an area of decision. The market is clearly saying it wants to move higher on this stock. Now, is this a great company that you should invest a ton of money in? No, I'm not so certain about that. For me, this is just a trade. And I'm just looking at it on the basis of there's a lot of folks that are crowded on the short side. And as they cover that short interest in excess of 31% to whatever amount they cover, that's fuel for upside. Another bit of fuel to watch, that's going to be options flow. So I'll be taking a look at how this thing trades. That'll be one of the areas that we focus on this morning. And again, it's already up about 7%. It's already traded about 10% of its average volume pre-market. So there's a lot of interest in this thing. Another one we're seeing some interesting price action in is DJT, or Trump Media. They're announcing that they're going to be putting out a blue chip crypto ETF soon. So that stock is now pushing higher by about 4.91% this morning on just over 500,000 shares traded. That news crossed the wires just about 20 minutes ago. And we're just about to dive into Bookmap. But before we do, I want to let you know there's an awesome pro trader webinar series. It is available by visiting their Discord. You can join their Discord, check out their events. They run these educational streams regularly, including mine, every week, Tuesday, 9 a.m. Eastern. So I encourage you to check it out. And also, if you've been waiting for a great deal to pick up a copy of Bookmap, I've got some good news for you. Right now and until July 11th, you can get up to 60% off of Bookmap by using the code 4th of July 50 plus 10 exclusively at Traderade.com/bookmap. So feel free to screenshot this. I'm going to go ahead and put this out there for folks to see on social because I feel like this is a pretty solid deal. And so I've just posted that out there for folks to see. So if you follow me on Twitter, you'll also be able to capture that deal, be able to see the code and the link. So with that all said, let's go ahead and close out the presentation here, dive into Bookmap, and we've got SoundHound on screen. We're just about 16 and a half minutes from market open here, and we can see the trend of this thing. This morning, we started to see increasing interest. We'll just zoom out a little bit until we get to that pre-market open. And it consolidated until about 7 a.m. Then we started to see more interest building here. And since then, it has been a uptrend microstructure. And what I mean by that is a series of higher lows and higher highs building. We had a really large offer here at $12. And you can see that was about 73,000 shares on offer. So that's chunky. Sellers did try to absorb buyers there with that offer, and it really so far hasn't proved fruitful for those sellers. We still see buyers moving higher up to that next offer zone where there's about 40,000 shares on offer, or at least there was earlier. It looks like there maybe, yeah, it's just about there, around $12.30, $12.35 on SoundHound. And above that, $12.50, you've got a whopping almost 250,000 shares on offer. So there is a lot of interest in exiting at higher prices from folks that probably bought this thing much lower. The real question is, once the market opens, do we see a further drive higher? With the amount of interest we've seen pre-market here, with 3.62 million shares trading so far in SoundHound, again, that's about 12% of its daily volume on average. Trading pre-market, that gives you a sense there is a lot of interest in this thing on the long side. And with short interest of over 30%, that gives you a sense that some folks are increasingly nervous when this stock moves this quickly to the upside. And just give me a moment. I'm just going to peek around the different streams here to see what folks are saying. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Caesar. Good morning, ER. Hope y'all are having a good day out there. Happy Taco Tuesday to all those that celebrate. And if you guys have any other stocks that you'd like me to look at, I'm happy to do that. Just drop a request in the chat. But I think the focus of today will likely be SoundHound, and we'll also, of course, be checking in on the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, and likely gold as well. And from the broader markets today, I'm not expecting anything too dramatic right now. I think it's more likely we get a day of consolidation unless there's some headline risk that comes out from the Trump administration. Obviously, that was one of the catalysts yesterday for that sell down intensifying. That's the thing we always have to look out for. It reminds me a lot of trading during his first term. There were much more market moving headlines directly from Trump in the White House than we typically see during a presidential administration. So if you all started trading during the Biden administration, this is probably a bit jarring because now you may at any moment, whether it's during regular hours or extended hours, have some headline come out of the periphery that completely changes what some of the trading dynamics are that we can expect. And that just, for me, means you've got to be a little bit more sensitive about how much size you put on and the duration of your exposure, particularly if you're day trading. If you're swing trading, I'm assuming you've got stops in place. You're managing your risk by not putting more than 1 or 2% of your capital at risk for any trade. But for day trading, you've got to be super careful because a lot of folks are using leverage. And if one of these headlines comes out and it's not favoring the direction you're in a trade, you can get absolutely killed. And, your stops obviously will get triggered, but they may not get triggered exactly how you want them to be triggered. If you're in a less liquid regime, if you get a big gap, you can have your stops triggered outside of the levels you were hoping for. So be careful with size in this environment. It's still a pretty illiquid market, and that's become the new normal. And Caesar's asking about the NASDAQ here. So NASDAQ is not showing overbought conditions like the New York Stock Exchange, which is interesting because tech really was leading this rally. But zooming in on the NASDAQ pivots here, just as we get closer to the market open, for me, my pivot to be bullish above and bearish below is going to be 22,936.25 on the NASDAQ futures contract for September. We can see going into today that that's been kind of an important level the market's trading around. Now, this is an options derived level. I'm looking at NDX options, and I'm factoring for all the options on the chain and all the exposure and looking for levels that are important. Key 1 minus is the second largest level of put exposure on the chain that can prove to be decisive. If you get below it during regular trading, especially, it's more likely that negative dealer hedging pressure could take the NASDAQ back down to gamma 2. If we start to push above it during regular trading, it's more likely we're going to retest those overnight highs. So this to me could be a somewhat decisive level, but I think if we push above it meaningfully, break above those highs, we could get another 100, 150 points to the upside. On the other side of it, if we break below gamma 2, that magnetic level, you do have a confluence of support around 22,899.75 and 22,896.25. So there's more chunky support below than resistance above. And that kind of tells me if we do get that push to the upside and we're above the BGL, that we've got some serious room higher if we can take out the overnight highs. But overall, again, I'm not really expecting a lot of fireworks today from the markets. Let me just take a look also at our calendar for today. We just had Redbook, nothing really exciting there. So Redbook year over year came in at 5.9%. That's good. Consumers are spending more year over year. Some of that is because things are more expensive, and some of that is because the top 10% make up about 50% of consumption trends, which is a little insane how K-shaped that distribution of outcomes is, but that is the world we live in now. We also got used car prices coming up month over month. No surprise there, given that tariffs are being expected to have an impact on new car sales. Used cars are becoming more expensive as a result. So used car prices coming up 1.6% month over month and 6.3% year over year. That'll add a little bit to some of those inflation metrics that we're watching. Other than that, though, this is a pretty sleepy week for macro data. The biggest data point that we're going to get in really is tomorrow with the Fed minutes at 2 p.m. Today, really not a lot going on here. We get data from China later tonight on their inflation rate, however, which will be interesting because they've been in a deflationary environment overall. So I've been asked, what is the pivot on ES right now? And we're going to be looking at options derived levels to qualify what the pivot is that we're really watching for ES here. So for now on ES, I'm looking at 62.46 as my pivot to be bullish above and bearish below. That's the big gamma level on ES. And the reason I'm looking at that is that if we get down to it, we could get kind of stuck there. But if we get far enough below it, say 10, 15 points, building some acceptance over 5, 10 minutes, you can have a further pull lower. And that could be a pretty chunky pull, like a 50-point pull lower, just based on the way options exposure is there. On the upside, you could be looking at some resistance around, really coming in around 62.96 and 63.21. But for today's purposes, I would look at 62.46 as a pivot level to monitor on ES. So give me one moment here. We're going to switch back to the bookmap view of SoundHound. We could see it's consolidating here ahead of the market open, which makes sense after it's had such a big move as we approach the market open. It's up about 6.67% on almost 4 million shares traded. Pretty chunky move. Another potential squeeze to watch this morning might be Big Bear AI. That one's also, it's not quite as aggressive as SoundHound, but we're going to put it on the radar here. I'm going to just pop it into bookmap. This is a similar setup in terms of the amount of short interest, the fundamentals of the stock being poor, so hedge funds crowding into the short side, and seeing some interest from momentum traders and short squeezers wanting to kind of get into this thing. And then there's also one more here we'll add in, that's IONQ. Again, these are not companies I'd really want to invest in, but I am interested in some of the trade opportunities. So let me just get these charts loaded and backfill the data here. So kind of a similar look here in Big Bear AI. Around 7 a.m., folks started to get real interested in this one. Again, not quite as much volume, but still interesting. And then IONQ, wow, this thing is getting a lot of interest this morning as well. About 1 million shares traded on an average volume of 22 million. So you got about 5% of volume trading pre-market. This thing's up 3%. And we're just about 3.5 minutes from market open. And if y'all have any stocks you're watching for potential squeezes or otherwise interested in, let me know. DJT may be another short squeeze. I mean, it's got a reasonably chunky float, but almost 20% of shares are short here. And it looks kind of bottomy overall. Let's just pull up a chart on that one. So it is kind of perky here. We're watching that DJT chart on a daily basis. Can't say I'm a huge fan of the company like all these others, but it's hard to ignore that 800,000 shares have traded this morning. It's off the highs, but still up about 4.11%. So some decently squeezy stocks here. Let's look at IONQ. This one has got a lot of interest in it. It looks like it's in a pretty healthy uptrend. Zoom out to a weekly. It's getting close to the top of its trading range, so I'm not quite as interested in this one here, but still worth watching. And then Big Bear AI. This one is setting up nicely. It's already had a big pop. This was one of the ones I shared on the Traderade Discord with members as well as a potential squeeze. You could see that beautiful sort of rounded bottoming formation here, launching off that high volume node. Still could have some room higher here, though. I don't think we can count this one out. It's probably got about $2.5 left to the upside before we start seeing it get a lot more heavy on the supply side. But we're going to focus on sound mostly because I think that one could take off today. We'll see what happens. But I really like the look of this chart. It looks like a lot of the other charts we just looked at without the big upside move, right? It looks like it's just setting up for that. So here we go. We're approaching the market open. I'm going to shift over to the S&P futures here as we do. Hey, Ships, I have not talked about gold yet, but I see gold in a consolidation phase for now. And I still am bullish of gold. I still think we could hit $4,000 an ounce as early as the fourth quarter of this year. But for now, and really for the past couple of months, gold is just consolidating sideways. So if we pull that up, let's just say we look at XAU USD. This is a chart that still looks quite healthy to me. And it's just doing what gold needs to do to prevent a parabolic blow off and then, a calamitous decline. It needs to consolidate. It's right here in this high volume node. And I think that overall, we're still in a healthy uptrend. We're above the 21-week moving average. Bollinger Bands are still expanding. So this is still a squeeze breakout play with higher upside, I think, as a strong potential possibility. And S&P seeing some selling pressure here off the open. We're also getting a lot of alerts for SoundHound here, so we're just going to move over to that. Wow. Let's zoom into the time here just a little bit more and get present with the price. And there's a big explosion in SoundHound. Wow, look at that. They're not messing around with this one. That's why I brought it to you guys, because I thought we had some decent chance for this thing to move. And SoundHound just absolutely ripping here. You can see these large trades, one after the other, the aggressive delta bubbles. This is why I wanted to bring this to your attention, folks. I'm gonna just pop this bookmap chart out there. Well, I'll try to do it without it putting alerts all over the place, but I'm gonna pop this bookmap chart out there. I love short squeezes. This is one of my favorite types of trades to really get into. Seeing a lot of action in IONQ here too. We'll get to that one in a minute, but I'm loving this price action in SoundHound. My goodness. Absolutely awesome. Now trading up 9.71%. So that's one thing that's kind of cool about Bookmap too is when you're watching these squeeze plays, you really get a sense of the rhythm of how these things are playing out. There is definitely some folks that are in a bit of a panic to cover this morning. There's no doubt about that, the way this thing is trading. And we just keep seeing these huge lots coming through. It's already traded 6.91 million shares this morning. No, I'm sorry. Let me correct that. 9.24 million shares this morning. Now up 10.8% on SoundHound. Insane. Love to see it. Let's just check out IONQ. Look at that. That was another one we were talking about setting up for a continuation squeeze. Boom. There you go. IONQ also rocking and rolling on huge buy side delta. You can see that with the really big bubbles here. Very interesting to see how many of these are squeezed. Look at Big Bear. Wow. Just straight vertical off the open. All these squeeze plays are rocking and rolling today, which tells you hedge funds are not having a good time, which I'm okay with. Us retail folks are having a great time. That's all that really matters. SoundHound now trading up to 12.3%. Absolutely amazing stuff. Let's go check back on the S&P here. S&P is not having a great morning. Seeing some downside pressure building here. We'll wait for some of that options flow to come through to get a better sense as to what some of the larger desks are thinking here. We do see a little bit of iceberging in. So there are some larger desks actually buying this weakness here. Nothing too major yet. And I'm just going to quickly turn that off because it was spamming me. But IONQ just retreating a little bit here off its highs. Big Bear AI, similar look, but let's go ahead and zoom in here. Let's just do the 30-minute. Just really impressive move, consolidating after that gain right off the open. Sometimes you get a bit of a feel for a day that's going to be squeezy. You see a lot of these, forgive my French, but basically shitcos running really hard. These highly shorted companies running really hard pre-market. And it's also just a summertime thing. I can't tell you how many times in June and July the lowest quality stocks have these enormous squeezes. And you'd think getting beaten up summer after summer after summer, some of the folks on the wrong side of these trades would change their strategy. So far, we really haven't seen that happen. SoundHound getting close to the session highs here. And new high in SoundHound there. Getting up to a pretty large offer zone at 13. That could be a consequential level. I'm just going to take a look at the gamma profile for SoundHound real quick. And a lot of that interest is 12, 13. I would say the call wall on SoundHound was at 12, and they blew right through that right at the open. So that in and of itself gives you a sense of how much determination there's. Remember at 12, that was where there was a really large offer that was taken out. So you can see that's also a pretty chunky area of buy delta on the session volume profile. Once we clear 13 on SoundHound, the next highest levels of call interest are 15 and then 20. And this is also interesting, the way that these things can trade when the market is going the other way. Because if you think about it, if you're a hedge fund, your long book is not doing so well this morning. Your short book is not doing so well this morning. And so typically you've got risk managers tapping traders on the shoulder and saying, you've got to degross. And hedge funds are running the highest gross leverage they have. It's like a very nosebleed historic highs. What that means is if you look at their net interest, they're very short a lot of these stocks, a lot of these macro products like IWM and otherwise. And so the way they clean up, the way they do that degrossing is going to be leaning more into covering shorts than selling longs. And that's exactly what we're seeing this morning as SoundHound trades higher by 12.48%. Big Bear also not to be left behind here, trading up by 8.86%. Quantum Scope, another low quality company that's heavily shorted, trading up about 8% here. Let's see, IONQ also kind of following the pack, but a little weaker. And we talked about that with the chart. That could have a little bit of upside, but I really like the look of SoundHound, the best of all the ones we had looked at for these potential squeezes. The big level for SoundHound we're going to watch here is going to be that $13 mark. That is the largest level on the book for offers right now until we get to 15. And they are gunning for 13 right now. Almost nonstop buying. There's been a couple of little token sell bubbles here, but this is a market that is seeing a confluence of retail traders like us buying this thing and hedge funds covering it. That is exactly what is playing out right here before our very eyes, and it's a summertime tradition. And I believe there'll be a number of other short squeeze opportunities that play out until we see net leverage come back more into positivity from hedge funds and gross leverage come down and these stocks become less crowded. SoundHound has now traded 16 million shares, average volume of 31.6 million. This is within 10 minutes of trading plus pre-market. That's an enormous amount of volume traded already. To give you an idea, the float is 366 million. So we've already turned over about 4% of the float, largely in 10 minutes. Here we go, 1292, 1290. We're just right under that zone. We can see that offer thickening up here now, 200,000 shares on offer at 13. And let's take a quick look back at the S&P 500 futures while we wait for that to resolve. We can see a bit of basing here. Gamma 2, that big magnetic level just under us. Iceberg buying has tapered off. We saw that most of that iceberging was happening as markets were selling down. Now we're seeing just a very, very timid amount of iceberg selling into this strength. NASDAQ, pretty similar look as well. Drop off the open, now consolidating. Some stop runs involved in those drops as well. And we're going to go back to SoundHound, see how this resolves. We can see that some of the larger, likely market makers reflecting on options positioning, 13 being a pretty big strike, And you see a lot of these offers and bids have coalescence with where there's a lot of interest in calls and puts. That gives you a little bit more of an idea of these could be pretty important levels. When you see that confluence, it's telling you that the market also sees this level as quite important. Now, let's quickly also look at a longer term chart here because a lot has changed just since the market opened. So there you go. We looked at this chart before most of this move had happened today, and it's a pretty chunky move. It's a continuation. Notice when we broke above the 21-day moving average, this thing really started to get more excitement. Now we're building on that. And if we zoom out to the weekly, we're getting to another pretty important decision zone right here, just around 1240, where there's that low volume node, and we're already trying to push above that. But this is an area to watch. This is pretty important. If we can break above 13 on a closing basis, I think this thing has room to run quite a bit higher. I'm asked, how do I gauge if the S&P versus NASDAQ futures may be leading or lagging one another? You can look at relative strength, the gains of one index versus the other, as a very simple proxy for that, remembering that the NASDAQ is the higher beta, lower liquidity peer of the S&P 500. But I think the best way to look at it is to break out a heat map of the S&P, and if tech is nice and bright green, then the NASDAQ is going to be leading the way. If it's more distributed across the broader market, it's the S&P that's going to be leading. You can also look at options flow. For the NASDAQ, QQQ is the most liquid instrument where options are trading. So you can get a sense as to the aggression in QQQ options versus SPX options, which is the most liquid options market for the S&P 500 cash index. Just taking a look around here. And seeing that buying coming into Soundhound here. Take my eyes off the screen for a second, and it looks like they're going to challenge 13. Getting real close. 12.99. You might see a little bit of a retreat after they pull through this because it's such a big offer zone, but let's see how it goes. Let's see if they're actually able to make that push. If we reject here, that's not a good sign for the squeeze. But if we can make a push through there, that's a pretty healthy sign that we can get some continuation. There you go. That was a pretty big buy, too. Well over 300,000 trading on that buy in all those lots that just traded. So getting a little bit of a retreat off there, but they took that offer out. Now let's see if they're able to make a push higher after some consolidation. You could see that next big offer zone's around 14. And hearing that there is ongoing discussions now between the U.S. and Japan on trade. So we'll see how, as Trump calls the prime minister there, Mr. Japan, takes that latest letter. So checking in, Soundhound up 14% on 20 million shares traded, about 21 million shares. That's about 2/3 of daily trading volume, most of it happening in the first 15 minutes of trading. Big Bear AI, another one we talked about watching today, up about 11%, volume 31 million shares traded versus an average of 114 million. That's a pretty impressive move as well. Let's take a quick look at that Big Bear AI. So we had that pop off the open, consolidation, another run higher to make a new high, and some more consolidation here. The big offer zone on Big Bear AI, $9 with about 509,000 shares just overhead. And S&P futures getting a pretty big bid off that news coming out that it looks like maybe the Japan and US will come to the table and discuss this, and perhaps that'll mean there'll be lower tariffs on Japan, which would be good. Tariffs are not really good for anyone. They are a tax on the consumer that ends up often being how they're paid, or they're a tax on the supply chain. If some of the components of the supply chain decide to absorb some of that tariff, that leads to margin compression. So we are seeing a nice boost, and we're starting to see some of the options flow coming in. A lot of interest higher too here. Look at that warm call trading 691 contracts at key 3 plus. That's a large level of options implied interest in calls to the upside. Just above that call wall as well. Breaking above that would be a pretty solid signal that the S&P has room to continue. Remember, one of the things we talked about was didn't necessarily expect a particularly exciting session unless we started to get some headlines. Well, we're starting to get some headlines. The US and Japan agreed to continue vigorous talks on tariffs. We're going to go back to SoundHound here, continue to watch this one. And it'll be interesting if the market recovers how these squeezes react. Because now you have the long side of those hedge fund books not looking quite as stressed. So the question is, are they going to continue to cover with as much vigor? Still getting a number of large trades coming through on SoundHound, though. These block trades. And you can set those alerts up right in Bookmap. It's pretty darn handy. Got just less than 10 minutes left on the stream. I hope this has been helpful for you all. Hope you all were able to capitalize on some of the stuff we talked about pre-market and seeing it play out before our very eyes here. This is why this is a lot of fun for me. And it's exactly what I talked about before. You don't need to just trade for the sake of trading. You look for the setup that fits your parameters and you trade that and you trade it aggressively if you have the confidence and if the setup warrants it. In this case, these types of setups are a ton of fun. And got more interest at 13. And this thing's already up about 13.78% today. Big Bear's up about 9.25%. SoundHound now approaching its daily average volume, having traded 23.7 million shares. So that's the other thing you really look for in a squeeze, that volume, that staggering volume, particularly out the gate. Usually get a gap up and then continuation with large volume, exactly like we saw today. New high on SoundHound here, continuing to push higher on pretty strong volume. Now, you're very kind, Chips. Thank you. ENVX. All right, let's take a look at ENVX. I got a request for that. We'll give it a moment to backfill that historical data. There we go. And I'm just going to close that visualizer column. All right, so Give me a second to pull up some stats on this one. So the ENVX is certainly looking a bit squeezy, although I think a lot of that squeeze is played out. So this one is 28.29% short interest on a float of 162 million and average volume about 5 million. So short interest about 45 million shares short. So this is another kind of like 15, 20 day squeeze event. And you've gotten a fair chunk of that already out of the way. You could see that they've been squeezing this thing higher since late June. So I wouldn't be quite as interested in this one. I think that a lot of the move is played out and we're getting into a pretty chunky zone of supply. So I would be much more hesitant on ENVX here. It seems to just sort of trade in a range and we're getting closer to the top of the range. So my risk reward radar tells me this isn't really where I want to be putting too much longs into. I'd be more tempted to capture gains if I was long this thing. Soundhound trading 13.10 now, new high of the session recently. And you're welcome, Joe. Good question. Got some other companies in that low quality list starting to run here. Moderna, Joby, Hut 8, one of the Bitcoin miners, symbol HUT, C3AI, Mara Holdings. This is a classic short squeeze day. There's some folks out there in New York and Connecticut sweating right now. And many of them are on vacation. So you got junior traders running the desks, and that just makes these squeezes even more appetizing because they tend not to react as well as the more senior traders. Just about 5 minutes left on the stream. Let's check back on the S&P futures here. And let's zoom out a little bit. We've got a pretty decent amount of put interest here. It's pretty well balanced. Let me just go ahead and take a look at my Discord because I've got all the info there on the flows and everything else for the S&P. It's pretty cool, all the tools we have on the Traderade Discord, quite honestly. And we got a lot more on the way that I'm building. But on the S&P, cash index got about 9,000 on the two most active put contracts and 6,000 on the two most active call contracts. So I would say there is still some heaviness here. The headline that we got is helpful, but you still have flows that could pull this thing closer to its lows again. So I would be a little more cautious on the S&P unless those flows improve. I'm going to go back to our Soundhound friend here and just continue to watch this squeeze as we round out the stream today. I appreciate everyone tuning in. Hope y'all are having a good week. It's certainly an exciting one. Got off that holiday shortened week, and we have a very light week of macro data and earnings, which typically means you get more just momentum driven trading. And certainly we can see that is the theme for a lot of these really small stocks that are getting squeezed higher. Soundhound now trading 27 million shares versus an average of 31 million, up 15%. Quantum Scope, another one we talked about a little earlier, up 10.5%. Big Bear up just shy of 10%. And there is a bit of seasonality to squeezes. I find June, July tend to be pretty good squeezy months, and November, December tends to be pretty good squeezy months as well. This isn't something you can always count on and look for. They don't always just play out. There have to be certain conditions, and one of them is hedge funds are irresponsibly short, they're concentrated, they're running really high leverage, and those trades start to turn against them. And that's when you can see these become more violent, like we're seeing today. Still seeing some big sweeps coming through on sound. These block trades are not messing around. So we are not done with this squeeze yet. And you can look at the trend microstructure here, zooming out. It's just higher lows and higher highs. Short bouts of selling that are quickly met by buyers becoming much more aggressive. And folks, once again, I want to thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Back to the Futures with me, Markets and Mayhem. On behalf of myself and Bookmap, always appreciate you all tuning in. Don't forget to check out that awesome sale they've got. You can get up to 60% off Bookmap with that promotion that I shared. You can find it on my Twitter feed. I'll be back next week, Tuesday, 9 a.m. Eastern. Tune in. Looking forward to see you then. And if you're interested in learning more about what I'm up to at Traderade, visit Traderade.com. We got a lot of really cool stuff in the works. Catch you next time.